Well, good evening to you, Professor Jen here. Little coffee table series here for little conversations. Thank you to Captioning Services, always doing the best things for us, getting all of our information together so all of us can understand one another and speak with one another, share ideas. And their services are always so wonderful, so timely. I rely on them so much. Here we are again. Good evening to you. I can say it's a little chilly out here in Rochester this evening. We're midweek in the spring break. Some of you I know went elsewhere. I hope you're enjoying yourselves. Yesterday was nice. Yesterday was sort of 50s, 60s. Tomorrow it's going to be in the 50s, 60s. So I'm really hoping for a little bit warmer weather myself. So you see, I have my picture this evening, Starbucks cups, right? He's saying, what's Professor Jen going to talk about tonight as it relates to pop culture, how we get information, how we used to get information, how we used to view everyday mundane activities. And here we are, my dears, Starbucks. The coffee generation, the coffee revolution. Really, it's more than that. Something to myself all about the subjects for this class. I was just saying to somebody, I enjoy talking about Shakespeare. I love that. I enjoy talking about the forest. I enjoy talking about new media. I enjoy talking about gaming. I enjoy talking about the exchange of ideas, the exchange of information. And really, what does Starbucks have to do with any of this? Oh, my dear, Starbucks has a lot to do with this. Or any other coffee shop, Tim Hortons, anything, even little regional, little mom and pops, maybe where you live. We don't see too many of those here in Rochester anymore. Most of them have closed. But this whole idea of the coffee shop, pop culture, how it is that we get information, how it is that we share stories. I think to myself, maybe 20 years ago, this kind of modality where I tell you and share with you ideas and stories, this would not really have been considered literature. It might have been considered at the time maybe new media, right? Or literary studies, but not really in this methodology where I tape it, you listen, we share, right? Because we didn't have this kind of technology. It wasn't readily available years ago. If I wanted to do this, clearly I would had to have gone to RIT and sat in their um, telecourse section. I would not have had the ability to do this from home. I wouldn't have even have had the equipment to do it from home. So this whole idea of how it is that we tell, we relay, we share, we share information, we exchange information. And the coffee shop really used to be that place. It used to be a place where you saw other magazines, you saw books, you saw people engaged in books and magazines. I was reading something the other day. It was sort of funny, a meme, and it said, make like we're in the 90s and just sit in a coffee shop and stare at people, and they'll think you're a psycho. Right, because today we see so many people that go wherever it is that they go, and everybody's glued to these phones. On campus, I noticed people in the shed, for those of you who aren't on campus with us ever. The shed is this beautiful glass building, and it's got light to it, and it has a lot of exposed outside view, right? East, west, north, some part of south. And you can see all kinds of weather patterns, people, and when the sun shines, it's like being in a greenhouse. It's really beautiful. It's a very big building. But I walk through campus and I see so many people on their phones. They're not looking out the window. They're not really talking to one another. They're really just sucked into the phone. So I started setting for myself some boundaries, just for myself, about being sucked into the phone. Not that that's a bad thing, but I like to enjoy campus. I come to campus many times a week. I spend quite a bit of time there. I love to be there. I love to see things. I'm a visual person, and I love to be really in the moment. That's how it used to be going to Starbucks. It used to be here in Rochester and other places when I go on conference with people, we go, I went to St. Louis, Missouri. That was a nice trip, lots of Starbucks there. I went to Philadelphia one year on conference, lots of Starbucks there. And people would wait online, they get a table, they talk to one another. We weren't engaged in telephones. We were laughing with one another, and the whole idea of getting coffee was not only a way to meet potential employers, the word networking. See, today networking might be the LinkedIn, all these other quote social platforms, end quote. But the social platform for us in pop culture happened to be the Starbucks. I've been in Rochester a very long time, and I've had a wonderful career here, and I really lived my entire adulthood here. For the most part, I can't tell you how many people I've met over the course of many decades, say at a coffee shop. I'll just use Starbucks, but you get the idea. I've met colleagues, I've met people that I've become very intense friends with that I relied on over the years. I've met realtors I've used. I've met people to exchange ideas. At one time in my career early in technology and media. I had a few little taping shows. I met this guy. This is sort of an interesting story. Talk about pop culture, right? Met this guy at the Starbucks, and he said to me, this is what he said to me. It sounded like a pickup line. He said, "Oh, I see you here a lot. You come here often, right?" And at the time, I was married, still married. And it wasn't a pickup line. I'd see him there as well frequently. And he said, I teach. I said, "Oh, I teach." He said, "Oh, yeah, and I have this girlfriend." I said, "Oh, that's nice. I'm married." And we had a lot in common. He said, "I have this portable ability to tape any kind of media on site." He said, "And I'm doing some pilots for a radio show here in Rochester for 1180 AM. The time I think the call letters were Wham, might have been Wham, WHAM. Anyway, 1180. And there was this fellow, his name was Alan Harris. He had the Alan Harris show. He was always on 8 o'clock in the morning, far too early for me. Anyway. So I met this guy, Mike. We're still friends till this day. He just doesn't live in Rochester. He said, "Oh, I'm doing some pilot shows to be on after the Alan Harris show." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "You have a voice for radio." He said, "Would you like to do some pilot shows with me? Do you have any topics that you think would be interesting?" Lo and behold, at a place called 12 Corners in Brighton, New York, we had, I think, 8 pilots. We did 8 tapings for shows. We had 8 pilot series, which were 22 minutes long because they had to cut in for time to have advertisements, which of course, as you know, advertising is what pays all the bills. And so we did these 8 tapings, and they were very well received. So interesting. If my friend Mike had not moved away to Ohio, I think we would have had a contract for all 8. What wound up happening is that none of the shows were picked up by 1180 AM. And instead, Alan Harris himself invited me to speak on his show. I had a few little spots in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, with Alan Harris, and we would talk about social issues. This was the year 2001, 2002, 2003, somewhere in there. And I'd come like as a guest speaker in the morning with the Alan Harris show. He picked these topics because he knew they were topics I liked. I enjoyed talking about the homeless situation here in Rochester. I enjoyed talking about persons with AIDS and HIV and their underrepresentation, the fact that they were voiceless. People didn't want to work in programs with persons that were living and suffering with AIDS and HIV. I would like to talk about, at the time, domestic violence. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, it was not a very well-received discussion. I remember one show I talked about domestic violence and what men suffer that are the victims of domestic violence, partner violence, either from women and or same-sex persons. You know, these were topics that I laugh now because I was really ahead of my time. These were topics in pop culture back then that people really couldn't talk about in mainstream media. Of course, I was doing these things. I didn't care. Obviously, nobody was mad. They invited me back and I kept talking, okay? So the coffee shop was a wonderful experience because people could go and they could have things in common with other people. It felt like a safe space. You know, when I say the word safe space, that phrase has changed. Today we look at it from a social emotional perspective to say a safe space, you know, where we know we're not going to attack people, we're going to be inviting, we're going to be accepting. Here's a word, inclusion. Maybe in my Alan Harris days, if I knew the word inclusion, neurodiversity, I'm giving you all kinds of new language here, right? You know these words, but many people didn't back then. Or they did, but we called it other things. That would have been on the Alan Harris show. I guarantee you, I would have been talking about neurodiversity, or in the case with my son Sergey, love of my life there, I would have said he's neurospicy. Anyway. So the coffee shop was a place I referred to the phrase foot traffic. It was a foot traffic place. I remember I would go to different coffee shops with Mike, this friend I was sharing with you, that we would do these tapings. And we would meet other people because they'd say, "What are you doing with that technology?" They never saw this technology before. And they'd see we were doing a live taping for the show, for these pilot series at these Starbucks. And people would wait to finish when we were taping and they would talk to us and share ideas for tapings, for shows. And Mike and I wound up meeting so many people in Rochester just by being in the coffee shop. And it was just such a wonderful way to meet friends. It was such a wonderful way to exchange ideas, to meet new people. I remember in another coffee shop here in Rochester, not a Starbucks, but something similar, similar format. I met somebody that one day noticed that I was writing something. I used to do a lot of my writing for either poems, I wrote a couple books, I would write some ideas, some short story, etc. And I'd go to the coffee shop. I felt that I would have a little space to myself, you know, and I'd write it out by hand. People say, "Oh, what are you writing?" You know, it's, "Oh, I'm working on a book or this or that." And I remember one time somebody that I didn't know. I never saw before. I was at a coffee shop and he worked at a particular college here in Rochester. And he said, "Would you like a job teaching? We have a couple positions I can't fill." I would never have gotten that other little position as a part-time position for this little college if the person didn't see me in the coffee shop. So you see the connection. It was sort of like today on trend when we say social platforms, like where did you meet somebody on Facebook? Where did you meet them? I would ask my daughter use MySpace, or people use other platforms today, LinkedIn, other engines to find other people. And that's how people know one another today. But again, back in these other times, it was really part of pop culture where people would go, especially in the arts, to different coffee shops because they were not sexually charged environments. Very few people were looking back in 20 years ago, 15 years ago, to pick people up at the coffee shop. It just wasn't the thing. Now, maybe it is today, it just wasn't then. So people would go and they would converse. They would share ideas, exchange ideas. People then would start going at certain times to meet other people. Remember, we didn't have cell phones. And if we did, we didn't have the ability to really text. And if we did text, it really wasn't possible to be so conversant or fluid in the texting. People were really sort of speaking in code because we didn't even have the keyboard system on the phones to have all of these, you know, intense texting, sentence structures, etc., use of vocabulary, vernacular, etc. So the coffee shop was a place where so many people went. I remember other times I do a lot of fiber arts. We say, "Well, what does that mean?" I crochet and I like to make scarves. I like to make little blankets. and I like to draw. I make my own stationery, make my own paper arts. I get a real kick out of that, you know. And people would meet at the coffee shop. We would do fiber arts together. We would make paper arts together. Similar to RIT, where I can use the comparison. At that little place I love, Makerspace, over in the shed. Sometimes I give crochet lessons there. I do paper arts, fiber arts. Nobody looks at me like I'm strange. Why is this old lady in here doing all these things? It's a place where other people go to exchange ideas, exchange crafts, etc. But this is what the function of the coffee shops used to be. And so for the price of a cup of coffee, say maybe $1.50, $1.80 today, maybe $6, $7, something like that. Uh, People could sit for hours, exchange ideas, relax, have a departure from everyday life, meet other people. It was so easy to talk to people in the kind of format because you could even say to somebody, gee, I see you here every day at the same time, same day of the week, and they say, oh, yes, I come this day, that day. Oh, did you ever meet so and so? He or she also does fiber arts. It seemed like such a natural way to meet people. I don't know if it was COVID exactly. I ask people because sometimes I think my perspective isn't really on par, but I would say COVID is what sealed the deal with the coffee shops here in Rochester and the coffee shop culture. But I would say maybe when the economy started to slip, I would say somewhere around 2000. 15, 16, the economy here started to slip. And of course, when people are trying to make their home economy, their home budget work, you know how it is. You have a budget too. Your needs might not be as expansive as maybe a family's needs, but you get the picture. People are going to start knocking out $5, $6, $7 drinks. Nobody needs that. You can buy a whole rotisserie chicken, you know, for $7, $8 somewhere else. Nobody's going to spend that for a coffee. And maybe the idea of cell phones, because we're so independent with these phones, we didn't need these foot traffic, congregate settings for social platforms anymore. So I started to notice that it was partially due to economics, more self-reliance on the phones, other aspects of media. I started to see less and less people at the Panera, the Panera. I started to see less people here in this region at the Starbucks. And it's not only me, what it ultimately happened pre-pandemic. This is important as we look at pop culture because really the pandemic is also part of pop culture, how it changed things and how it meant so many different things to so many people so quickly. And how I look at this situation, I started to see that the Panera, the Tim Hortons, the Starbucks started to close 5 o'clock at night, 6 o'clock at night, 7 o'clock at night. We're talking about Starbucks. I remember Starbucks here in Rochester pre-pandemic. Uh, they used to be open till midnight. So midnight, you could get a coffee, you could sit, shoot the shit with somebody else, crochet, see people, foot traffic, vibrancy, talk about politics, talk about fashion, see politics play out, understand other people's ideas different than yours, etc., till midnight. But then pre-pandemic, we would see it would close 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock. What is the reason? Did people decide that they didn't want coffee? No, that's not the reason. I sort of think part of it is that these phones, I don't want to blame technology, but I think part of contemporary culture, pop culture, we realized we could do all these great things, streaming services at home, right? The TVs became bigger and lighter, right? Cheaper. And we could also do all these things and be entertained by the phone. So why go out and meet people for coffee? Today, so many of the Starbucks close 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night. The Panera closes 8 o'clock at night. I remember when Panera was open till 10 o'clock at night, people wanted to eat salad, have coffee, have pastry. They would cliche, I'll meet you, we'll have a coffee. Oh no. All of these Keurigs came out, right? All of this ability to make these frappuccinos, lattes, everything became so individual. It became so independent, you know? And the Tim Hortons, they close in some areas now 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Is it that people don't want to drink coffee after 3 o'clock? No, absolutely not. People just don't see it as a need to be in a congregate setting, exchange news ideas, have relief from everyday life. They're having relief from everyday life. The new pop culture must be where people have relief from everyday life where they can just have streaming services and or get on the phone or watch the world go by and view all kinds of reels and TikTok and whatever else. But they certainly don't need to be in coffee shops. Tell you what I see different today because I like to talk to people. I really love to share ideas. I like to get ideas from my roundtable discussions. I have a little podcast coming out in the fall of 2025, contemporary issues on trend to talk about things that are very current or current here in Rochester. So I'm looking forward to that. Here we have all these Wegmans. If you know Rochester, maybe you've been in a Wegmans. And I talk to everybody in all of the Wegmans and I say, how are all these little cafes doing in the Wegmans? And they're really picking up. This is so interesting because people want to be out, right? I'm not the only person that seems to want to be out. People want to be out, but they don't want to spend $7 and $8 for a cup of coffee, right? So with the Wegmans, the coffees are coming in at like $1.90, 2.30, 2.60. I think their highest coffee is 3.35. Interestingly, at the Wegmans, the cafes at the Wegmans, they all sort of have the same format. They all sort of look the same, but they're starting to get very, very busy. So you say, why, right? What is the trend of this? What is the pop culture of this? So Wegmans cafes now put in televisions. So that seems to be a hook, that it's a new congregate setting, right? It's not really new. It's nothing that we haven't seen before, but it's sort of a new invitation. New invitation to come back into the store. You don't exactly have to food shop, but that the cafe exists. You can watch television, you can meet people, you can exchange ideas, you can get coffee at a much cheaper rate than let's say at the Panera, the Tim Hortons, the Starbucks. You can get a sub sandwich, right? You can get all kinds of food to eat. If you don't want to buy a pre-prepared, you can certainly buy something in the frozen food section and then go to the microwave, which all these cafes seem to have microwave, and you can microwave your own soup, right? So if you don't want to say spend $8, $9 on a soup at the cafe, you can just go get a can of soup and microwave it. They have paper cups, paper bowls that you can take and microwave it for the cost of what you would have paid if you had cashed out and took it home. So I see so many people now. In all of these cafes, I see families that come that eat pizza that ordinarily would have taken the pizza home. So obviously they don't want to go home. You know, we've all spent in this region. I'll talk about COVID at another time. I have to be in the mood for that discussion. Sometimes I get so irritated with that discussion. But maybe they spent now 5 years at home, right? We're sort of at the 5 year mark when Uncle COVID knocked at the door and told everybody, give us 2 weeks. Oh, that phrase makes me crazy. Give us 2 weeks. That was a very long 2 weeks. And people don't want to be home. I see families, I see people your age, young persons that maybe work from home, maybe in college. I see an awful lot of people doing homework at the grocery store cafe. Can you imagine? I see people sitting there. I saw it today. I saw two people there playing cards at the grocery store cafe. I've seen people play other games. I saw a family one night bring a Scrabble board. Can you imagine? To the Wegmans Cafe. I've seen people in snowstorms because they want to be out, they want to get their provisions, say if they're going to be stuck 2, 3 days at home. We had a snowy winter this winter if you're in Rochester with us. I've seen people, excuse me, a little sneeze there. I've seen people have a whole pizza with their family, not exactly run home to eat it. I've seen people buy 2 liter bottle of soda, get the cups of ice for free, sit there, have the soda. I've seen whole families buy donuts, sit there, have donuts, laugh. I've seen, in observing pop culture, I see now other people have caught on that this is a very inexpensive way to go out. Certainly, the grocery store, 9 times out of 10, is a safe space for many reasons, whether it's political, social, emotional, physical. Not a lot goes on in the grocery store. And people seem to be staying for long periods of time. I go with my family quite often here to the grocery store. We get all kinds of foods. We get, bags of salad with a thing of dressing, whatever I don't finish there. Who's going to eat a whole bag of salad and a whole thing of dressing? Nobody, right? But I take the leftovers home and just really at a fraction of the cost. Like I could really eat all of my dinners there. If I'm gonna buy a bag of salad, some cold cuts, say, from the deli, and a dressing, why do I have to run home and eat that? Why can't I eat that at the cafe and see neighbors, see friends, see people I live in town with, to make new friends? You know how many people Sergey and I, since the pandemic had lifted, really, I'd say 3 years now, we've met so many people really as part of this pop culture sort of scene at the cafe, at the grocery store, people it seems to be in the very beginning, Serge and I were the only persons that seemed to want to eat the cafe. It seats 84 people. Okay, well, by the time we were there and done, there was 82 other spots available. You get the picture. We were the only ones. Now we go to the cafe. We see all kinds of people sitting doing the same exact things that we're doing because maybe part of pop culture now, the new trend is come out of the house. Maybe come out of the house in an economy that has gotten expensive, right? It's not a political discussion, it's a discussion of economics. It's become very expensive, in some ways very prohibitive. The Starbucks is closed early. The Tim Hortons is still closed early. The Panera closes at 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock in some areas. So maybe the cafe is a way to say, you know, refresh your memory. This is how it used to be when things were open till midnight, and this is how things used to be when people met other people. They exchanged ideas, they were able to speak with one another, etc. Sometimes I think it's like a relief. It's very relieving to see people, say, on campus where I see them laughing together, or I see people in a class together where they didn't know one another before, but we built something called community. And then I'll hear students when I leave campus say for my 2 other classes this semester, I'm teaching women in crime and I'm teaching a writing workshop as well. And I hear students that I know full well did not know one another before class. They'll say, "Oh, do you want to go over and grab lunch? Oh, do you want to get together?" Or they'll say, "I'm playing, an instrument in a show this evening or this week on campus. Why don't you come hang out with us and come to the show as my guest?" It's so wonderful to see people make these connections, sort of like how I remember it with the coffee shop. Back in my day in college, part of pop culture, it was very popular to go to happy hour. Happy hour meant 3 o'clock to say 5 o'clock, and that was only Monday through Friday. So it was this 10-hour window over the course of the 5 business days, weekdays, that was considered the happy hour. So people would pour out of the dorms. Back in my day, drinking age was 18. We would pour out of the dorms. We would go to happy hour 3 to 5. And sometimes people went every single day of the week. I mean, I didn't. I had other things to do to be happy. I had to work, but people went. It was just a regular thing people did, just like the coffee. Now that we're all so independent, and we have all these abilities to entertain ourselves in our own homes, make our own coffees, etc. I wonder how well did that serve us, you know? So is the new pop culture when I hear young people say, "Oh, I have this great idea." I say, "What is it?" "Oh, we're going to go to the cafe at the Wegmans at the grocery store." And I say, "Really?" They say, "Yeah, and we're all going to get a rotisserie chicken and bring the Scrabble board game. We're going to sit there and have chicken and soda and play Scrabble." And I just chuckle to myself because why? Because it's not a new idea, you see. It seems new, but we've already been there, done that. Or as so many people say, that was so 5 minutes ago. But maybe we're on trend again with this. Maybe it is a resurgence of our pop culture because we've had these extremes in these past several years. Many of you come from regions, areas, maybe countries where you didn't have these very extreme lockdowns. Well, here in Rochester, New York, we had some pretty extreme lockdowns, let me tell you. But I want to talk about that now because I get very, very worked up. But I will talk about it as it relates to pop culture because COVID changed a lot of ways. We see art here, we see real estate, we see our spare time. It really affected us here greatly in Rochester, New York. But that's a good conversation for another day as it relates to contemporary issues. So something to think about. Maybe everybody at RIT should pour out to the shed with your Scrabble boards, your Yahtzee, what else? Cards. What else do people play? I don't know. Dice. I don't know. Maybe you need to be with your fiber arts people. Maybe you need to work in more project-based things to be together. Maybe you need to bring your own coffee. If you're like me, you're not going to spend $7 on coffee. That's not going to work out for me. Then I'm going to spend $42 a week on coffee. Not happening. Because by the time I add that up in a 4-week period, that's a car payment or something much larger. Not going to be happening. But maybe we need to have part of pop culture, another one of these functions where we say it's in vogue to go on picnics. It's in vogue to sit over by that cobblestone wall when it's so nice out here at RIT. Somewhere between Eastman, Building 1, Building 7, College of Liberal Arts, Building 6, there's that cobblestone wall. Sometimes I see people with hammocks. I love that. I see students with hammocks. I see students sitting at those table and chairs with their laptops, their phones. You know what else I see? I see frisbees. I love the frisbees. I see the hacky sack. That's good too because we see people sort of getting back out there, taking these personal challenges, meeting other people, having a coffee together, having a soda. Everything doesn't have to be hardcore to make these little inroads in our lives. Maybe the resurgence of having these congregate settings. I think to myself, Shakespeare days maybe they went to the theater, that was like their congregate setting, or they went to the town for the market, right? To get animals, slay animals, get things to wear. You know, back in the days, 1300s, 1400s, 1500s, into the forest. Maybe people walked to go to these, what you and I would call today a Renaissance fair, where people would say today a flea market. People today would say a swap meet. Maybe it was these kinds of activities that people relied on not only to get consumables, but to get their spirit, their spirit enhanced, uh, to have their souls readjusted, to have spirited conversation, to meet people. Other countries do this. We have markets, walkability, Greece, Turkey, lots of markets, you know, our friends on the African continent, Egypt, Israel, all kinds of people have markets. They go to market. They spend a whole day at the bazaar. We have all kinds of friends that go to the shuk, right? They go to all kinds of things. They spend whole days there. But I don't know, maybe American culture, we become very, very independent of one another. Just something to think about. Anyway, I've taken up enough of your time this evening. I hope you're all very blessed. and enjoying yourselves during this break, etc. Things to think about. I thank you so much for spending the time with me. I wish you well and good night.